Hey, this is Pete from 21st Century Prepper. Tonight's podcast will be about bows and bow hunting. Joining me is Skip.
Good evening.
And Patrick.
Hello.
Okay, I have never bow hunted. Just got done telling you guys the last time I touched a bow was on vacation to win a t-shirt at a resort in Mexico. And prior to that was middle school back in like 1983. So in PE class. So I'm a complete novice at this. So what different types of bows are there for in this country? I know there's different bows in different parts of the country, but the 3 or 4 main bows in this country are what kind?
Well, I guess there's 3 broad categories. One would be a category of traditional archery, which consists of recurve bows, long bows, self bows. Would it all be included into that? I can get into the more specifics of those bows in a little bit. Basically, those are bows that are where an arrow is only propelled by the energy that is stored in the limbs as you draw a string back. And it's a progressive increased amount of stored energy the further the string is drawn back. Next broad category would be compound bows, which are bows that have wheels or cams that typically have a let-off, and they store energy in the limbs, but it's a little different in that those cams and wheels allow for a different type of forced draw curve. In other words, more energy stored in the limbs per inch. So they're a little more efficient, and they allow for a drop-off in the amount of poundage held, so it's easier to hold that full draw and have control of the shot, hold for longer, etc. And then the next category would be crossbows, and I won't claim to have a ton of experience with crossbows other than having bought one for my wife and tuned it up and shot it a little bit. I don't have a lot of experience other than on the range with crossbows. And like I said, those would be the major categories. If you want to break down crossbows just a little bit further, there's crossbows that have just limbs, and there's other ones that have wheels, just like a compound bow. The one I bought for my wife is just limbs. And there's pros and cons of that. And then if you want to break down traditional bows a little bit, a self bow would be typically basically just a piece of wood, such as Osage Arn or Bodark, or yew. There's other woods you can use. And they just tiller that and taper it, and that's just basically a piece of wood. And there's a lot of details that go into that. And then there's bows that are just a piece of Osage wood with maybe a strip of bamboo on the back, and that does a lot of things as far as the shooting characteristics and the stability, long-term strength of the bow. And then there's what most people shoot if they shoot traditional archery is a bow that is a fiberglass backed bow. You'll have woods, maybe it's multiple layers, maybe it's one layer, and they'll have thin laminations used for the limbs, and they'll have a layer of fiberglass on the outside. And that makes the bows, I don't want to say indestructible, but so much stronger and long-lasting. And I have more than anybody has a right to have of them. And that would be the main categories of bows.
So of those, what would be advantage of and a disadvantage of each class? The biggest ones. You don't have to go into minute details about each one, but what are the biggest issues of or yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Sure. I'll start with the crossbow, even though it's the one I use the least. But so advantages, there's huge advantages to that in some ways, in that the bow is cocked and ready to go. So in much the same way as a rifle. In fact, in the traditional archery world, some people have some degree of animosity towards it for whatever reason, and they'll call them cross guns. And the reason they'll call them that is because you shoot them just like you would a gun. They have a scope typically, and they have a trigger, and the limbs are horizontally mounted instead of vertical, and you really shoot it just like a gun. And typically they can have a little bit of an extended range compared to the other bows, but there's a lot of wiggle room in that. They can be finicky, but they definitely can extend your range. The fact that you're using a scope, if you wanted to hunt in low light conditions, and if you want to talk about a survival situation, like even hunting under the moonlight, you would be able to do that. Obviously, that's against the law in most places, but that would be advantages. And they even sell different cocking aids and pulley systems for cocking the crossbow back, because typically they have shorter limbs, so they have to be a heavier poundage of draw weight to be able to put enough energy into propelling the bolt. So that would be a major advantage of the crossbow, although some of the disadvantages, they're extremely bulky compared to the bows that I shoot, and there's a lot of room for mechanical failure. A lot of wear and tear on the strings if you don't use lubrication. Anything that uses a scope has a tendency, or the ability, if it's jostled a little bit, to have the scope go off. There's some other
the horizontal limbs can
differences. Don't want to get into that.
The horizontal limbs are a
The
problem.
compound bow. Can you not hear me?
No, I can hear you fine. I was just commenting the horizontal limbs are also a problem. I've had an issue with the horizontal limbs and not being able to take a shot because it was right next to a tree on my tree stand.
Yeah, that would be a problem.
Absolutely. Then the compound bow, it would have some of the same limitations as a crossbow, as far as things that can go wrong, like cams be coming out of alignment, knocking your sights off in your rest. But by and large, it has some of the same advantages as a crossbow, such as having that let off, so you're not holding as much draw weight back when you're fully drawn, which is a large advantage in certain situations. For example, if an animal was coming out, you could draw on it before it got quite close enough and wasn't as likely to see you and run away, and you'd be able to hold and wait for a good shot opportunity to arise, which is much more difficult with the bows that I shoot. But those are some big advantages, certainly. And as long as you don't knock your sights off or your rest adjustment or whatever, those are both of the compound and the crossbow are very accurate shooting platforms, very reliable, with those caveats that if something goes wrong, you better be able to fix it. And it can ruin your hunt if you don't have the tools and the ability to take care of them.
Oh, yeah.
As far as you agree with that, Skip?
Yeah, I've yes. I guess I could tell a funny story that I have not noticed that the limb of my crossbow was right up against a tree, and I missed a very large 9-pointer because my limb of my crossbow smacked the tree, and about knocked me out of the tree stand at the same time too.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, that's a true story.
Oh.
I mean, like you said, it's very
You know,
much
and-
like holding a rifle, and you get that adrenaline burst, and you throw it up on the I've got a rail around my tree stand, and I threw it up on the rail. I'm sighting in, I'm waiting for it to come into my scope picture, and you kind of get that tunnel vision, and it can crossbows, they're great.
Yeah, and that can happen. Go ahead, sir.
No, I was saying crossbows are great, but people think that they are so much more than a regular compound bow, and they're really not. To me, the biggest advantage was the scope, and I've got a bum shoulder, so quite frankly, it used to be in my state of Maryland that you were only allowed to hunt with a crossbow with a medical permit, and I can't hold a lot of let off, so that's how I got mine, and that's another good advantage for a crossbow, in my opinion, anyway.
from a hunting standpoint, I would think possibly the largest advantage would be not having to draw
Yes.
while the animal is close
Right.
and alerting the animal.
Right.
That's a huge advantage.
That is.
As far as the bows that I shoot, I mean, I just as far as what history for me, I hunted with a compound bow for 26 or 27 years.
Yeah.
Killed lots and lots and lots of animals. But I switched over to traditional archery for a multitude of reasons. Because I enjoyed it, I guess, at the time. I guess part of it was just I thought it would be cool or a challenge. And then after I started doing it, I enjoyed the practice so much more. Just the feel of being more a part of the shot sequence, that I just really enjoyed practice so much more. And there's limitations, which I'll get into, and some advantages to a traditional bow in a hunting situation as well. So limitations, the biggest limitation, or biggest limitations would be that, yes, when you pull it back, there's increased weight when you're holding it back, so it makes it a little more difficult to hold on your target and weight and everything, although, you know, with some training you can become used to that. And the fact that you don't have sights, and that's probably the biggest thing that gets people to not shoot accurately or have problems under hunting situations, is that they don't have sights, and they tend to not be able to pick a very small spot to aim for, and a lot of times they end up aiming just for center mass of the animal because they don't have a sight to focus on. Mm-hmm. You can still shoot a traditional bow with a sight, but most people don't, because I guess they think it's more traditional, whatever, they romanticize it a little more. And if I had trouble shooting accurately under hunting conditions, I would absolutely put a sight on, and people's accuracy would go up tremendously just from having that sight. Now, what I would say, I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. That's a great tip for people who are contemplating, doing more of a traditional way. Throw that sight on there if you need to, and that's a great tip for people.
And absolutely, you get and back in the 70s, sights on traditional bows were widespread. People just, I think, when traditional archery had kind of a lull when compound bows came out, and then people that started to gravitate back to traditional bows, they wanted to be as bare bones as they could, and that's kind of the state of where we are now. But obviously, bear in mind, you throw a sight on there, you have the same problems I referred to in other places. Now you're relying on that sight. You pull your bow up into a tree, it gets knocked off, you don't know it, and you are not going to hit anything. And that's just the way it is. So I'd say that would be one advantage of a traditional bow, is that you're not reliant on the sight, so you aren't as susceptible to those kind of errors. Another big advantage, I think, of traditional bows is that you can get a shot off faster. You don't have to worry about lining up a peep sight or any of those fancy things. If you see an animal, you can pick up and get your arrow on the string. You can just pick it up and shoot it. Now, that's especially important when you're shooting at animals that don't give you a long time for the shot opportunity, such as wild boar. They notoriously don't stand still. They're always on the move. Yeah. So you have to go get a shot off quickly. Another situation where it's an advantage is because you're shooting instinctive, you are programmed to understand how far away something is and how far you have to have your elevation. Whereas a lot of the people that are shooting compounds need to have a rangefinder, figure out which pin they're going to use, and it takes a little bit longer to process those things, especially for spot and stalk type hunting, where you're out looking for the animal, you find it, you don't know the range. That can be a real disadvantage for using a compound bow system. So anyway, I guess those would be what I would consider some of the major advantages and disadvantages of the different types of archery weapons.
Now let me ask you, what is the what pound draw do you typically hunt with on your recurve?
Wow, that's a great question. And I wouldn't say that what I do is typical. So I shoot bows anywhere from about 50 pounds to 100 pounds at my draw length, but I don't typically hunt with the bows that are around 100 pounds.
Yeah.
With the bows that are around 80 pounds, I've shot a water buffalo with already. But for hunting here in the States, most of my hunting is done with bows that would be in the upper 50s to mid 60-pound range at my draw length. Now, I'm fortunate that I have a little bit longer draw length than some other people, so that increases, if you want to think about it, the energy under the curve, the forced draw curve. So if I shot a bow that's 50 pounds at my draw, like at 29 inches, it's going to have a lot more energy stirred than somebody drawing a bow that's 50 pounds at 28 inches.
Right.
So that's an advantage for me. That's the typical poundages that I shoot, and I practice enough that I can hold them back quite a while and still shoot accurately. Other people have different shooting styles where as soon as they come to anchor, get to full draw, they're releasing right away. I would say more people shoot that way, but I think because I had, 26, 27 year history in compound archery, I kind of come back to draw, settle in, get a good aim, focus, and take my time a little bit more. And I've already shot a few things where I had to wait. For example, I was hunting in Texas on a big ranch, hog hunting, and I had a large boar coming around on the cedar tree, so I used that cedar tree to draw on him so he wouldn't see me, but it took him 10 seconds to come around, clear the other side of the cedar tree, and give me the shot that I wanted.
Right.
A lot of people wouldn't have been able to do that, but it's everybody's option to be able to train and be able to do that if they want to. And obviously, I think that I should have mentioned as far as a disadvantage is that typically you need to put a lot more work into it and shoot a lot more regularly with a traditional bow to be consistently accurate. So that answered the question of what I shoot with. If you ask me what most people shoot with for hunting purposes, I would say 45 pounds to 50 pounds is probably a real common weight for people to hunt with, especially for hunting, shooting smaller sized hogs and pretty much any deer. That would be perfectly fine.
Yeah, I know quite a few of the guys that used to be in our hunting club went traditional route. They were in the 50-pound range. I guess we need to throw a disclaimer in there that there is usually a draw minimum weight per your state's hunting rules, so you need to check into that before you go hunting for the first time with your recurve, and make sure that your bow, I think it's 35 pounds here in Maryland, is the bare minimum you're allowed to hunt with.
Yeah, and it's very different in every state.
Exactly.
Some 35, some 40, some 45, and some states even draw a distinction regarding what you plan on hunting. If you want to hunt elk, it may be 5 pounds heavier. So, yeah, you definitely would want to check into your rules in that regard.
Just throw that little disclaimer in there.
Looks like Minnesota is 30 pounds. It used to be 40.
There you go.
So.
Well, a lot of the reasons why things like that have changed is because the bows today are so much more efficient than they used to be. They used to be shooting bows that used Dacron strings that stretched a lot, that weren't as efficient. Now people use synthetic material for their strings, or their fast flight strings, so they're just a lot more efficient compared to, I guess I don't want to get into all the different types of bows unless you want me to, but it's suffice it to say the traditional bows of today are a little more efficient typically than they used to be.
Okay, let's keep on the efficiency part.
Okay.
Now, this is a prepper community that we're talking here with. A lot of people talk about making their own bows and their own arrows. What's your opinion on that?
My opinion on that is the amount of skill that it takes and the amount of time that it takes to make your own arrows, to have them straight, fly well, and be reliable, is probably disproportionate to what you would get out of it. Now, that's how I feel about the arrows, especially. You can buy arrows fairly cheap, fairly inexpensively. Although you can buy some dowel rods and make arrows, but to find arrows that are appropriately spined, that gets into a whole slippery topic right there too. Appropriate stiffness for your bow, it's not that easy. It's not as easy as one would think. I don't know that I would. I think that most people, for sure, would be better off buying arrows already made. And bows, though, there's a lot of good videos out there of people making bows out of PVC pipe. They may not have the longevity that a fiberglass bow is. And I'm sorry if you hear that noise in the background. My dog is demanding attention. But there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of information out there regarding how to make PVC bows very inexpensively, just with basically melting them and forming them. And the videos I've seen, they look like they perform pretty darn well. Like you would probably be able to kill a lot of animals with them. And just depending on what you use, you can get them to a poundage that would be appropriate. So that definitely would be an option for somebody that wants to do that. I think that arrows, takes a lot higher level of skill and a lot more, it's a lot more intensive.
Yeah. I'll throw in there for crossbow bolts. Don't even try to make one for a crossbow, because you're talking energy there that I've seen carbon fiber bolts explode coming out. So, I mean, that's a lot of energy in a crossbow. And if you're going to try and make that out of sticks and twigs in the woods, I'd just go buy a case of bolts.
I hope you're glad that this total noob totally agrees with you completely on that subject. I think trying to make your own arrows is a little, the amount of, I mean, if you really want to put the amount, if it's something that you want to, that's your goal is to do it, and you're really going to put the time and the effort into it, that's great. But if you're talking just a survival type situation where you want whatever, the time and effort and the energy you put into it would be far beyond, I think, the what you get out of it. So yeah, go buy a couple cases of pre-made stuff. So and when you shoot them, try to find them.
I do have one. Well, that's another topic too. But I do have one, not suggestion, but one option that people might want to think about that don't want to spend a lot of money. And it's something that I've been thinking about for quite a while. A fiberglass bow, just like the ones that you used when you were a kid, perhaps. They will last just about forever, almost indestructible. They're solid fiberglass. Now, there's pros and cons to them. The indestructible part, huge pro. I mean, you can abuse them. They're impervious to the elements. A lot of them will come with the ability to shoot the same bow either right-handed or left-handed, and they come in a variety of weights, and they're extremely inexpensive. You can do a search on eBay, find one that's in the poundage range and the length that you want, and you can sometimes get these bows $20-25 shipped. I just traded a knife for one. It's a bow that was made in either the late 1950s or early 1960s, a Paul Bunyan model 300. Now, this is a heavier poundage that most people want to shoot, but I got this bow, this is just like in the last month, and it's just under 70 pounds at my draw. It was waiting at the end of the driveway for me. I grabbed it, went into work, came back from work, shot about 20-30 arrows, found some arrows that flew straight out of it. I went out that night, and I shot a pig. I mean, they will do the job. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, that's pretty cool. I really enjoyed that. But they will do the job, and they are, like I said, they're not going to break the bank, and they're probably, truthfully, better at than anything you're going to build for yourself. But just options, that's all. Just options.
Okay, back to arrows. Again, noob here. the availability of what and what kind you should have, and for the typical person, what you want to start out with obviously is going to be something that's simple, but for the types of hunting you want to do, you need obvious different arrows, right? Again,
Sure.
totally here.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different options, whether it's for a compound or a recurve or a traditional bow. I'll talk about some of the broad classes of arrows. Wood is a very traditional type of shaft that they would use for an arrow, but there's tons of other options, including aluminum and carbon and fiberglass. Now, fiberglass arrows aren't made commonly anymore, other than for arrows for bow fishing, and they're virtually indestructible, solid piece of fiberglass. And actually, if you want to talk about in a survival situation, bow fishing would be a very viable option for obtaining meat for the table.
I was gonna ask that after this. Have you bow fished?
Oh yeah. A lot of times in the spring when the water comes up and the carp are spawning, they'll come right up all along the bank, and they'll be rooting for bugs and whatnot.
Yep.
And you can just wade along the banks or walk along the banks and you see them. And there's some tricks, you have to worry about refraction of the light for making sure you're aiming at the right place. But yeah, no, absolutely, it would be a great way. And in a survival situation, you will have no trouble with eating carp if you're hungry. And a lot of people I know make fish cakes out of them, but you can also use them for fertilizer for your garden if you're going to do some organic gardening. And your chickens, if you have chickens love to eat the carp. So those are some options. Now, the advantages and disadvantages of all those different types of arrows. Wood arrows, they're quiet, and wood is fairly readily available, even if you want to make arrows for yourself, getting different diameter dowel rods or whatever. But they're not nearly as hardy as some of the other materials. Now, wood arrows, if you hit a hard surface, there's a real good chance that it's going to break and the arrow is going to be ruined. If you use an aluminum arrow, you hit something hard, it's either going to be fine or it's going to be bent. But if it's bent, you still have problems. So it's not even close. The vast majority of people use carbon arrows now. And they have good quality carbon arrows, not like they have in the past using the pultruded carbon, which were prone to catastrophic failure and sending shards into your arms.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of videos and pictures out there regarding that. But the shafts they have now are much, much better quality. They're available in an incredibly wide variety of stiffnesses to accommodate different poundage bows. Now, it seems like every stop I come to wants me to go into a tangent about how to get your arrows to flex properly. And if you want me to go into that, I absolutely will. But as far as getting your arrows to fly out of your bow, if they're not spined right, if they're not the appropriate stiffness, they're not going to fly right. And I can get into that if you want.
Well, I think it's just like any rifle hunting. You go out, you don't buy one brand of ammo and just shoot it out of your gun. You buy a batch of each, going back to when I hunted with the recurve. Yeah, my father went out and I think we bought like 4 arrows each. This is back when Kmart used to sell, archery stuff, and they had the big boxes with all the arrows and all. And that's what we did, is we went through the different shafts to find out which flew the truest out of my bow, and
that's absolutely true. And they do sell some fairly inexpensive arrows at Walmart. It's one of those things, like if you're actually preparing and trying to get ready, you can do a little research. They sell shafts a lot of times based on the poundages that you shoot for your bow, but most of those are based on compound weights as opposed to traditional weights. There are some shafts available that are for special weights of traditional bows, and there's charts out there for it. But there are some tricks that people that are in traditional archery do without even thinking about, that I never thought about hardly at all when I was doing whatever compound archery we'll call it. And to get the, you roughly get the right stiffness of shaft, but there's something called archer's paradox, which keeps your arrow from contacting the bow after it leaves the string. The arrow tends to bend and clear your hand and that part of the bow, because if it hits there, it throws your arrow flight off and it makes it noisy. Also, if it's too light spined, it bends too much, the arrow is going to plane and not go in the direction you wanted to shoot it. And in extreme situations, if it was really too light spined, the arrow could break. So what you do is you vary the amount of weight on the point or the length of the shaft, changing the bending point basically, or how likely it is to bend. Obviously, the shorter shaft isn't going to bend as easily and can be shot out of a heavier bow. Or if you have a more heavyweight point on the end, it's going to bend more easily as well. So those are some things to take into consideration. And I'm sorry if you guys want to jump in.
No, you're good, man.
Tend to run off.
No, you're doing fine.
No, you're doing great. If anybody is listening to the podcast and want to know what he's talking about, I've seen that when you watch like videos and they do it slow mo. That bend is amazing. It's like, what? And for the first couple times I watched videos, I'm like, how does it go straight? But then if you look into the science behind it, then you understand what's going on there. So if you watch an archery, someone shooting an arrow in slow mo, and you'll see that bend will happen. It's pretty cool.
Right, and you could Google that. Just Google archer's paradox, and that would, I'm sure, bring up tons of examples of that.
Mm-hmm.
So one other thing I wanted to add about arrows is the fletching, the feathers or pieces of plastic on the back end of the arrow, which stabilize it in flight. It makes up for subtle errors in spine, subtle errors in the way you release the arrow, and it basically helps an arrow straighten out a lot more after you go. So people either use feathers typically, or they use vanes, and there's a wide variety of sizes of those. Vanes obviously are going to be more impervious to the elements, but they're also a lot stiffer. So if you're shooting a traditional bow, you might want to use an elevated rest so that the pieces of plastic don't hit your shelf and throw your arrow flight off. Most people that shoot traditional bows, not all, but most, use feathers because there's a lot of give as that's going by the shelf and it doesn't throw your arrow flight off. So whatever, that's just some generalizations. And if anybody has any questions, I'm sure I have some other things I could add.
No, I pretty well got you.
I think you. We'll go ahead. It's been we're about 35 minutes, right? 40 minutes already. So we'll go ahead and kind of wrap her up. It's pretty basic information.
Yeah, it was really good information, actually.
Yeah, I think typically, just like for like we tell people who are shopping for firearms, go to a reputable dealer, ask questions, ask to try out different bows, ask more questions. Go to a sportsman's club and see if they have rentals, or find someone who does have a couple bows and go out and ask them if you can go with them and shoot some. If you walk into a store and someone says, "This is the one you should get," I'd be a little weary.
Yeah,
it's probably because they have 5 of them in the back room and they just want to get rid of them. Get out there and test them and see what you like. Right?
Oh, and I completely agree. And one thing I would add on the tail end of that is one of the biggest mistakes people can make, tends to affect guys more than women, is wanting a bow that's heavier than they can handle. It does you no good to shoot a bow that you can't handle the weight of, and to miss your target. They say I'd rather hit slow than miss fast, and there's a lot of truth to that. Women don't seem to have quite the ego in those things that men tend to have. These are just generalizations, but I've seen
Oh, it's
it a lot.
100% true.
Yeah, well,
You
You ain't gonna get an argument from me on that one.
you really want to make sure you're not overbowed. You can always get a heavier bow later on as those small muscles get stronger and you build muscle memory and it becomes easier. But I would really recommend not starting too heavy.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add to the conversation there, Patrick? Or it's something you think everybody should know or understand?
If somebody has questions, specific questions, they can always get a hold of my wife, and I'll try to address them. I don't know what the format is. I assume that you're taping this and you're going to put it out there and people can watch it. But if you do have questions, people can get a hold of me through my wife, and I'll try to answer the questions more specifically.
Okay. Okay, cool. Skip, you got anything?
no, I think you pretty well covered it, man. He did.
Yeah.
You knocked that out of the park.
Yeah. My wife actually wants to get a bow more than I do. So I think it's one of many things on the list. So
Well, that's
I don't know
ironic.
when we'll be getting one, but maybe someday.
Well, that's funny because my
Maybe before
daughter.
I turn 60.
Yeah, my daughter, she loves shooting a bow over firearm any day of the week. She loves shooting my crossbow. She's got a compound of her own, and she just absolutely loves shooting bow in there. So there's nothing wrong with
Well,
that.
I tell you, women tend a lot of times just tend to be these excellent archers. In much the same way as like in basketball, they tend to be great shots a lot of times because they'll focus on their form. They don't have ego, and they just focus and they do it. Whereas a lot of times the guys like, I've got to shoot X poundage of bow, and it really hinders their development. So women just, a lot of times they just become incredible archers. That's all.
Okay, well, I guess we'll wrap it up. Thanks for listening. Make sure you check us out on 21st Century Prepper on Facebook and .net on the World Wide Web. I'll get to it someday here. I haven't updated the website in I don't know how many months. And Twitter, Instagram, all those other things. So, and MeWe. So, okay, thanks so much.